Well, good evening to everybody. And just to repeat, the intent of the Museum Minute is to take one of our objects from the gallery, feature it, and link it in with what we're doing. So today I wanted to talk briefly about the VICOM Recce Pod that Steve Peugeot was put downstairs. When we look at the transition and the movement into the new aircraft era in the early 60s, Canada was going through the huge challenges of bringing on not only a new weapon system, the CF-104, but a new role as low-level nuclear strike. The challenge, even bigger on top of that, was de Gaulle's machinations, tantrums about who can do what with nuclear weapons, and that moved Canada to reconstitute a photo reconnaissance capability. So in 1963-64, one wing in Marville, France, became the center of Canada's photo recce world, a skill set that it had not had since World War II, over 20 years. And when you look at the role of the photo interpreters with World War II, it was all for medium to high altitude. Now they were put with the challenge of low-level interpretation, a completely different animal, and with no training or skill sets to get there. So when we look at the mission, they needed something to be able to do photo reconnaissance. So a Canadian-made solution done by Vinten or VICOM with the Vinten cameras inside, 4 70-millimeter high-speed cameras were put into the 104s and the Recce Pod. The Recce Pod, as I said, was designed by Canada and had the 4 cameras, 1 forward-looking, 2 obliques, left, right, and 1 straight down. There's the old Jesus button. In the cockpit, this is where the good news ran out with the Canadian solution. In the cockpit, the pilot had a control panel. You could select 1 of 2 speeds. They normally ran in the 8 frames per second, 2,000ths of a second. When you look at the Fairchild F8 down in our gallery with the Vedette, that was about a 1/50th of a second. So definite difference required for the motion blur when down low level as they were going along. The brightness settings were automatic. Interestingly, with the rather dated, or not dated, but the rather not superb navigation system, the LN3, that would still imprint location data when the pilot took the photos. Going back to my comment about Canada not having a great solution, the panel was in the lower right. And those in the audience that are pilots know that if you're flying your aircraft, for example, the 104, you got the stick in the right hand, throttle in the left. And now if I'm going to do something with my cameras, now I've got to take my hand off the stick. So when you're low-level environment, not the best solution. Many of the recce pilots that I talked to, that was often their biggest complaint. With the 2 oblique cameras, which were by far the preferred selection, the cameras were angled out and they were able at 200 to 500 feet get excellent coverage of the area they were flying by if they offset laterally. The forward-looking one was seldom used. It had been used a couple of times going down in line searches for tasks on rivers. The one that went straight down was essentially useless. If you've ever been silly, leaned out the car going down to Trans-Canada, tried to take a picture of a road with your iPhone, you can imagine how useful your photo is going to be. Well, now you're down to 200 feet of 420 knots. Enough said. So that gives you an idea. So 1 or both camera, 1 would be on. And what was pointed out to me is you'd say, well, why don't they just turn the cameras on and let them go all the time? Well, the problem with that was the more film you took, the more developing it took. And the more developing it took, the longer it took to get the photos to the decision makers. So the pilots were very thrifty, frugal, if you will, of when they turned the cameras on because they wanted to minimize the post-mission production time of developing the films. So the role of the pilot was not only to turn the cameras on, but also to give a visual report. So talk about this now. So they had extensive training and recognition of equipment so that the photo interpreters and the intelligence officers could interview them to get a feeling for what they saw. And that was part of the analysis process. So they would get together with the photo interpreters when the prints come out. Normal sequence was land, depending what kind of operation you were on the Egyptian line or in the dispersals. Photo was taken out right away, and from the time the film got out to on the table for looking at to see what they're going to print was about 30 minutes. It wasn't a flock of aircraft. They're all single ship, alone and unafraid. As we used to always joke about the photo guys, click, click, you're dead. They had no gun, no weapons, so when they went out on a mission, they were by themselves. Traditional watch map ground, whereas the recce pilots were with books. As I always said, the recce pilots always knew where they were, but they didn't know what time it was. The strike pilots knew exactly what time it was, but they didn't know where they were. So the two different worlds going along there. When you look at the mission, low level, 200 to 500 feet, altitude would go up depending on the target. 420 knots. They look back in hindsight saying we should have been faster. The one issue was if they had a really long range mission, they had the pylon tanks on, that may create problems for getting the photos. However, normal ops without the pylon tanks, the pod was absolutely outstanding, unlike the German 104s that actually had the bank because they had no oblique settings in their cameras. So what turned out to be a new system turned out to be absolutely brilliant. Target planning, they would go through cut and paste maps. It was interesting. They didn't have a lot of maps in the day, and one of the maps they found best were the Michelin yellow covered road maps that you bought in the road shops. And as one of the pilots was telling me, it's interesting. Headquarters was always beaking off about the $5 maps they were using compared to the $2,500 it took to run the mission. So always interesting how our priorities vary. As I just mentioned about the 30 minutes, we had that talking. So the anticipated operational targets, they were there to support the Army. Essential items of information, Army term. Everything was tasked out of 4th Allied Tactical Air Force. So interestingly, we were supporting the German 2nd and 3rd Corps in the United States 5th and 7th Corps, whereas the Canadian Army was up north. All the other nations were directly supporting their own troops. That got sorted out when we moved the brigade down south, but then they closed down the recce role. They had 12 different missions, and goes back to the point where you had to learn the difference between a T-54, T-62, BMP-1, sidecar, flat-face radars, et cetera, so you could go through your debriefing. Typical targets, they did think they may get pre-strike, pre-hostility targets, which would be very high risk because everybody's air defenses would be up. During the nuke days, they were anticipating getting post-strike damage missions deep into territory. And the general rule of thumb for the strike missions were 600 miles into Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, based on a line from Baden-Soligen. So they could get some very long-range missions. Last thing to this talk about was all the countries that flew recce got together. The Allied Tactical Air Forces, 2 ATAF up north, 4 ATAF where Canada supported. And in 63, 64, we didn't know what we're doing. 1966 was the first competition that they participated in, where all the nations would fly during this competition. And in a couple of years, 1966 was our first year, finished last. 1967, 441 finished second, 439 came third. And in 1968, we started winning. So in a couple of short years, Canada went from going around, what the heck am I doing, to actually dominating NATO. Day VFR only, that was a huge limitation, but we got very, very good at it. So it was a great asset, a great role, a great opportunity, a lost capability, and off we go. So got a little bit longer. Thanks for the question, and we'll turn it over to Jim now. Thank you.